All right, so again, thank you all for coming. My name is Tina Thibault, and I'm the Director of Media Relations for the province of Nova Scotia. Joining us today, we have Paul Mason, Executive Director, Emergency Management Office, Bob Robichaud, Meteorologist, the Canadian Hurricane Centre, Peter Andrews, Deputy Chief of Operations, Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency, Ansel Langell, Senior Manager of Emergency Management Programs, Atlantic Region, Canadian Red Cross, Inspector Jim Butler, Operations Support Officer, Halifax Regional Police, Staff Sergeant Bill Casey, Watch Commander, RCMP, as well as Karen Hutt, who is joining us via conference call from the Nova Scotia Power Emergency Centre, and Karen is the CEO of Nova Scotia Power. So thank you all for joining us. We will start with Paul Mason. We'll go to all the folks in the room. Again, everyone will provide their update, and then we will take questions after the last speaker. Paul?
Thank you. Just really by way of a quick update on the weather system that's been impacting the province all day. We continue to coordinate the province's response from our provincial coordination center located in this facility. We've been activated since 7 a.m. this morning. The weather system has been impacting us since really the early morning hours and will continue to do so over the next several hours, at least until well into the early morning hours of Sunday, we expect. I'd just like to emphasize the fact that this weather system is ongoing and that we'd really encourage everybody to exercise caution with regard to staying away from water areas such as the coast. There's some very large surf. Obviously strong winds, trees are down, trees are still coming down. There's a lot of live wires and what have you around. So just really want to emphasize those public safety messages of staying home, staying off the roads. There's still a lot more to go before this event is over and done with. I'd also just like to emphasize the provincial scope of the impacts of this event. We've seen very severe weather and surf conditions from Yarmouth to Sydney and really in all areas of the province. We've been working closely with all of our partners, municipally, provincially, our federal partners, and also our critical infrastructure partners. Our provincial crews have been out on the roads through various departments we work with. Department of Transportation, particularly of note, has been working to remove down trees. They have crews working in all parts of the province on that in order to keep the roads open, in order to mitigate the impacts of this event. So we'll continue to do that as this weather system moves over the province. I'd just like to highlight once again that there's still a lot more to go before this is completed.
Okay, I'm just going to provide a brief update on the storm itself. The center of the storm is actually approaching the eastern part of the Halifax area, or maybe just a little bit further up the eastern shore. For people in Halifax, you might notice that the winds have subsided somewhat over the last hour or so. That was expected with the center of the storm approaching. However, there are some very, very strong winds just on the back side of the system as well. The storm itself was declared a post-tropical storm, which says nothing about the intensity of the storm. All that means is that the storm has changed structure. We're still talking about a very dangerous storm that's transiting through the Maritimes this evening. We're seeing winds in the range of hurricane force, exceeding hurricane force from the northwesterly direction on the backside of the storm. So the storm is definitely not over. We expect the storm to actually track through the province of Nova Scotia in the overnight hours. So we still have a number of hours to go through yet with some very, very severe conditions.
Good evening, folks. At this point, we are still anticipating and expecting significant winds and storm surge in coastal areas. At this point, we have not closed the streets to the public, but we are considering to do so because our onlookers going down to the coastline areas and observing the general state of what's going on out there is impacting our emergency operations and our ability of our emergency responders to move throughout the city. So at this point, I'd ask our citizens to return home, hunker down as this storm continues to trail through HRM, and we'll continue with future updates as it is clear for folks to go to the public areas. Thank you very much.
Canadian Red Cross volunteers have been responding since this morning to operate 3 different shelters in Halifax. at the Canada Game Centre, the St. Margaret Centre, and the Dartmouth East Community Centre. We have shelter occupants at all 3 locations. People can still evacuate to those shelters if they need to, and pets are welcome. We do have the capacity to shelter animals. Volunteers in other parts of the province are still on standby to support any shelter operations or other requests for support as the storm continues to pass through the province.
Good evening, everyone. I want to assure residents that police, fire, and emergency management are working closely with our partners, both provincial, municipal, and federal. Our Emergency Operations Centre is fully staffed and working at capacity, doing very well. Today, we've evacuated approximately 150 residents to shelters as a result of some issues downtown with buildings. My message is also one of safety. If you encounter a barricade on the road, please don't drive around that barricade. If you encounter flashing lights or the lights are down, please treat them as a 4-way stop. And also, if you're outside, please go inside, take shelter. The storm is not over. It's a dangerous situation, and we want to ensure everyone's safe. Thank you.
Good evening. The RCMP has been responding to numerous calls of road hazards, trees, down power lines throughout the day, and will continue to do so as the storm tracks north to Cape Breton and throughout the province. The calls have been high. We have extra resources on hand and have been able to manage the calls. Call volumes, although the call volumes have been high, it's been exceptional circumstances, and we haven't encountered anything that we aren't prepared for. We've been preparing for the last week and ensuring appropriate contingencies are in place. This allows us to meet the calls for service and respond as arise. I want to reiterate what everybody else has been saying. Our primary concern is the safety of the public and our employees, and that's we want to make sure that people stay away from down power lines, the shorelines, and stay off the roads.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Karen Hutt, and as mentioned earlier, Karen, the CEO for Nova Scotia Power, is joining us via teleconference from the Nova Scotia Power Emergency Centre. Karen, give me 1 second. Karen, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Good. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I will follow up on some of the statements that others have made earlier that certainly as Dorian makes its way across Nova Scotia, it is causing significant impacts to the electrical system. At the moment, we have well over 300,000 customers without power. When the Hurricane Dorian began to gust at 90 kilometers an hour and higher earlier today, Nova Scotia Power issued a safety stand-down to all of our crews. A stand-down means that crews will be off the roads except in emergency situations. Stand-downs will be lifted by regions as it permits, which has not yet occurred. Given the stand-down, outage causes have not yet been validated. However, we're seeing a number of photos and videos by customers showing the impact as a result of downed trees, branches. We're certainly seeing this in Halifax and other parts of the mainland, and we know, as you've heard earlier, it's not yet Cape Breton, so there's more to come. Given the extent of the damage seen so far, we are in the process, as we speak, of securing additional crews from utilities and contracts. That will add to the approximately 1,000 personnel we already have in place. That includes power line technicians, forestry crews, planners, damage assessors, engineers, supervisors, and customer care representatives. Of that, we have more than 600 power line technicians who are ready to respond as soon as it's safe to do so. And as I said, the process of bringing in additional crews will increase that again within the next 24 or so hours by another 400. This will be by far the largest restoration effort that this company has ever mounted in response to a weather event. Our customers can call our call center, or if they're able to reach our website and make sure that they report any damage to their homes. And I will say again that once it's safe for our to get out there and do their work, they are experts at what to do. They know the job at hand, and they will do it extremely well. And we will not stop until the last customer is restored. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. So we'll now take some questions from the media. Logistically, I'd ask you to ask your questions in the room first, and we'll save any questions for Karen at the last, just so that we can go back to Karen on the phone.
I guess right off the top, thank you for obviously making this time and information available. In terms of injury, have there been any injuries? Have there been any emergency situations yet with everyday residents that you've responded to, or have things been A-okay on the safety front so far?
I'll take that question. We've been very fortunate to date. We've had numerous instances. We had a down crane, numerous trees down, power lines down, and we're very fortunate at this point to say that we have had no significant injuries or fatalities as a result of the storm.
You had mentioned earlier about closing some roads, I believe. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that and what roads you're talking about and why that's necessary?
Absolutely. So at this point, with the Nova Scotia Power being off the road, as well as our Transportation Public Works personnel, we have numerous down power lines, trees, and obstacles within the roadways that do pose a hazard to our citizens as they drive along the roadways. Also, with all those down trees, it poses more challenge to our emergency responders to navigate around obstacles while dealing with the traffic that is out there by the public. So at this point, we are strongly urging the public to return home. Please stay off the roads. The trailing end of the storm poses higher risk hazards than the leading edge. So our concern is that citizens on the roadway could be impacted by downed trees or power lines as the storm rolls through.
So is there any talk of actually closing down any particular streets at this point?
At this point, there are some streets that have been closed due to specific localized hazards, but we are considering in the next few hours whether an overall closure of the roadways is appropriate so that we can maintain our emergency response and ensure public safety.
When will that decision be made, and how will the public know about that?
We absolutely will put that out through public service announcement. I was just on the phone with the CAO and the city solicitor, and we're getting closer to making that decision.
Can we talk about the shelters? I'm wondering, I'm wondering if you could say how many people are utilizing shelters right now, and if there's, is there enough capacity, kind of addresses already, enough capacity to accommodate more people? Are you looking at setting up additional shelters anywhere?
So at the St. Margaret Centre, there were 7 people. At Dartmouth East, there were 17, and at the Canada Game Centre, which has been receiving people that are being evacuated for other reasons, there was 120 at the last count. All 3 of these places are generator power. They're community centres, and they're very large. And we've recently redeployed some more cots and blankets and things like that to the Canada Game Centre to house them. So, and then moving into tomorrow and beyond, if the shelters stay open, we can bring resources in from anywhere in Nova Scotia or across the country for that matter.
Halifax Water issued a boil water advisory. Can we elaborate a bit on that? Is anyone here able to provide information?
Certainly, I'll address that. At this point, the Halifax water system has not been impacted by this boil odor, but as a result of all the surface water attributed to this rain, there is concern that those that are on wells might be impacted by contaminated water due to the rain permeating into their water supply.
Obviously, not knowing how long restoration efforts will take, what would be the advice to folks who are on well water in terms of obviously consuming safe water? What are the options?
At this point, we do have locations where we have staged water and emergency water for the citizens. As well, in the short term, residents are encouraged to exercise boiling that water before consuming it as a precaution.
There was a lot of talk about comparing the storm to Hurricane Dorian. Is there anyone who perhaps may have worked during that, or who can compare, I guess,
Is this close to Hurricane 1? You know what I mean? Is it more powerful? What are we looking at? Because there's a lot of comparison effect.
Well, one of the main things is this is a post-tropical storm, which means that basically the structure of the storm is different. Juan made landfall as a Category 2 hurricane, so it was still technically a tropical cyclone when it made landfall. This is a post-tropical storm, but again, like I said earlier, it doesn't mean that it's a weaker storm. Not at all. It just means that the structure of the storm is different. So in terms of comparing the two storms, this storm is actually much larger than Juan was in 2003. The peak winds may not be quite as strong, but it's certainly covering a larger area, for sure.
Do you think the likelihood of the damage being more far-reaching than Juan, is that likely?
I think so, based on the wind field that I'm seeing with this particular storm. So, for example, in Juan, there was very little damage up. You only had to go as far as kind of Windsor, Nova Scotia, and you wouldn't get a whole lot of damage. We're still seeing power outages that extend up into New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island as well. So this is a much farther reaching storm than Juan was, even though the intensity is not quite as high.
We know preparations for this have been underway for, I'm assuming, several weeks. Is the impact so far more than what was expected?
I think it's pretty much dead on what we've been talking about over the last few days. We were talking about widespread power outages. We've been talking about downed trees, uprooted trees, potential for coastal flooding, and we've seen all of the above so far.
I guess with over hundreds of thousands of folks without power and the road to restoration unknown at this point, what are the next steps? What's some advice to citizens as we hurry up and wait for information to continue?
One thing I can address is that the winds will will still be gusty a little bit into the overnight hours and into tomorrow morning as well. So that may impact what Karen was mentioning earlier about the restoration process and getting the crews out there, because we're still going to be looking at gusty winds into the morning hours of tomorrow.
Do you know when? Oh, sorry, were you going to go ahead?
What I was going to add is that at this point, we are continuing to urge our citizens to remain at home. As the storm passes through, the next phase of this will be to assess the damage to the city and to implement specific plans to mitigate that, starting with kind of opening up our major roadways so we can ensure public safety, that folks can get to and from safely to hospitals, and for our emergency responders to be able to respond. Certainly, once we've done that assessment of all the damage, we will begin to execute plans to mitigate those situations.
Do we know when the bridges will be reopened at all, or does the weather have to be a certain condition? Anyone can speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly it is principally the wind conditions that pose the greatest risk to the bridges. Initially, the bridges were closed to high-sided vehicles, which are catch the wind, if you will, and then later on, when the wind intensified, the bridges were closed. Certainly, once the wind speeds reduced to a safe limit, Halifax Harbour Bridges will advise us and reopen those bridges. So at this point, I can't answer a specific timeline, but we will certainly communicate to the public immediately when that's known.
If you already touched on this story, is water available at fire stations in PP, or if folks are in dire straits?
Certainly, we have no reports of water interruption from Halifax Water. Certainly those that are on wells outside of HRM and not on domestic water, with the loss of power, would have lost the pump capacity for their water if it's not gravity fed. So there are those that do not have water within their homes, in which case we have put out emergency water supplies at 2 of our fire department stations for folks to access that water. I don't have that information in front of me. I believe it's Station 65 in Tantallon and Station 23 in Musquodoboit, and there are volunteer firefighters at those locations with water to hand out to residents.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, so we will now go to Karen Hutt, CEO of Nova Scotia Power. Karen, they do have a few questions for you, so I'm going to drop the mic here. Give me 1 second. Karen, I can repeat the questions for you too if you can't hear them. Hang on. All right, Karen, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. All right.
Great.
Karen, you mentioned that this is the, I think you said, largest restoration the utility has done from a weather event. Can you elaborate on that?
I'm sorry.
So Karen, the question was that you mentioned earlier this is the largest weather event that the Nova Scotia Power has dealt with before. Can you elaborate on that is the question.
Sure. I want to clarify what I said is this will be the largest response to a weather event that we have ever assembled. So we're in a position now, as I say, that we've got well over, frankly, 1,000 personnel who are on deck to support this. Within that, there are 600 power line technicians at this moment. Earlier today, when we began to, I should say, as we continued to assess the impacts of the storm, we had always, in our various scenarios, had contemplated a worst case, and certainly no question that's where we find ourselves. And so the things that we contemplated within that worst case scenario are the things that we're doing at this moment, and that is securing additional crews, making sure that we have logistics in place to be able to support them. And as you've heard from others earlier, one of the major components of this restoration will be around getting access to the facilities to do the repairs. So we're working, as you would expect, very closely with CMO and others to use those resources to get roads cleared and get our infrastructure freed up. So the moment that our crews get in there, they can be effective and get the restoration as quickly as possible.
Karen, with safety top of mind, obviously crews are on stand down, a little present. What will be the strategy once that mode is lifted?
So Karen, again, that is, what is the strategy once it's lifted that crews can go back out?
So the strategy will be that we'll immediately begin our damage assessing. So as long as the winds have calmed, we will have helicopters that we will use to go over initially all of our transmission lines. We'll do that province-wide. We'll then begin to assess distribution lines as well. We'll have assessors for communities on, going, driving around and reporting that back. In the meantime, we'll be following the protocol that always follow in any major restoration, and that is we will be looking to restore our critical care customers first. So certainly if there are hospitals, healthcare facilities, senior facilities, any customers that we know are critical care customers, we'll move to those first, and then we'll move to the largest scale restorations that we can complete at once. And so we'll go to feeders that we have access to that will allow us to get most customers on at first at the beginning, and then we'll continue to make our way through. But what I can tell you, with the amount of crews that we have in place and that we're bringing, every single community across the entire province is going to have traffic in those communities, and they're going to have folks working on restoration.
What kind of timeline are we looking at, realistically?
So Karen, the question is, what kind of timeline are we looking at realistically?
So the hope would be that if the winds do calm overnight, there's a small chance that we might be able to do a little bit of this work locally. We're pretty cautious about that, as you would expect. So I wouldn't hold a lot of stock in that. It's really the early hours of tomorrow morning that we are planning to really begin. So, sometime around 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, assuming that conditions are okay for us to do that, we will get at earnest.
So are we talking like days, though, or?
Karen, are we talking days in terms of cleanup from your perspective?
Oh, there's no question if we're sitting here at the moment with 350,000 customers out, and the storm hasn't moved through all of the province. This is a significant restoration effort. But what I can tell you again is that this effort is very different from historical efforts with the crews that we already have in place ready to go, and the additional crews that we will dispatch. And so as we get our feet on the ground and understand what we're dealing with, we'll be communicating what we think the situation looks like to customers.
Could you compare, there's a lot of comparison obviously between Dorian and Juan. How does it compare for Nova Scotia Power in terms of the number of customers and like the challenges they face?
From a comparison perspective, Karen, how does this compare to Hurricane Juan from Nova Scotia Power's perspective?
Sure. Well, certainly from a customer impacted point of view, there are parallels, but our response efforts extremely different. And so, you know, the things that we have already done over the course of this week in bringing our crews in and staging them and having them ready to go, and frankly, just the total quantum of for us to have at this point well north of 1,000 people on the ground ready to go is vastly different than what we were looking at compared to past events.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything we're missing, like any kind of message that we aren't asking that you guys want to get out to the public? I know obviously it was stressed quite a bit from several folks to stay off the roads, but just want to make sure that anybody else has an opportunity if there's something we're missing here.
Certainly, I'll just reiterate a few things. At this point, we're urging citizens to please stay off the roads, to please return home and hunker down as the storm proceeds through. Use extra caution in coastal areas. We're still expecting storm surge as the high tide approaches. Use extreme caution on our roadways. Due to power outages, there are no street lights in several areas, as well as numerous downed trees and power lines. And we also ask you to check in with your loved ones to ensure that other members and seniors are checked in with and taken care of as this storm progresses through. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to echo those comments on the provincial basis. I mean, everything that you just said, but really just as I kind of noted at the outset of this thing, this is a province-wide event. It's still got a lot more road to run. You know, it's certainly the eye of the storm and the central point of impact is moving through Halifax, but it is province-wide. So wherever you're at in this province, you know, stay off the road, stay home, and stay safe. We just want to drive that point home.
And sorry, this may have been addressed or obvious, but is there one part of the province that's been hit hardest so far? Would it be the Halifax area?
The center of the storm does appear to be moving through Halifax, but as Bob was saying from Environment Canada earlier, this is a very large storm with very powerful winds. So even though the center of the storm may be centrally located here, the impacts are province-wide. In fact, they're more than Nova Scotia. They're moving up through New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island as well. So just want to emphasize that for everybody to be vigilant, listen to those public service messages, and stay home.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.